Weak regulatory and law enforcement arms of governments. Our courts, our police, our inspectors of mines, our inspectors of labour, overstretched, under-resourced, undercapacitated. They're dealing with immensely complex legislation, and they really lack the capacity to apply the law, enforce the law, and punish transgressors. A factor that we cannot ignore is globalization and dependency. We are a third world, a developing country. We are beholden to the same kind of market forces that influence other economies, that produce commodities, and we, as South Africans, have to compete with all the other developing countries to make investment here as attractive as possible. That generally means a decline in labour standards, a decline in environmental standards, and it's part of this race to the bottom. To make South Africa an attractive investment destination, we need to make it more and more profitable for big business, which means more and more of the cost of doing business must be passed on to people and on to the environment. We also have an opposition, a political opposition in this country, and I'm talking about all the opposition parties, that don't have the courage or the integrity to stand up to big business and to stand up for the poor. I think the same is true for many civil society organizations. Where have you ever heard the opposition parties in this country stand up against big business? Stand up for the poor? They can't, they're too ingratiated to big business. If Cope wants funding, if the DA wants funding, they know where that funding is going to come from. Big business. So we have an opposition parties that don't have the courage to stand up and address the real source of the problem, which is big business. And it doesn't have the courage to stand up for the poor in the face of the kind of exploitation that we are seeing. I think we also have a major problem with a decline in academic independence and autonomy. I find it richly ironic that I have no trouble getting young law students to come and work for me as interns from Columbia University, from Yale, from Harvard, from New York State University. I get law students who come to work for me, to work in these fields, to work for communities, to work on human rights matters. I have yet to get a single student from a South African university. The kind of research we need, I'm talking about costs and benefits. How do you actually measure the costs associated with mining? How do you calculate the cost of environmental degradation on a community? Where is the research that's going into this? Where is the research going into valuing or costing the impact on our water resources? Who is doing those sums? Who's doing it? Who is doing the epidemiology? Who is linking the levels of disease in these communities and trying to identify what's causing it? What's the link with mining or not? Where is that research? Where is the progressive, independent research coming from in our universities? It's not there. Once again, the problem is, I think, at the root, is that the universities have become so dependent on big business for grants and funding and support that they are no longer willing to undertake the kind of critical research we need to move forward on the ground. Another factor that I do want to mention is the very low value, economic value that is attached to communal land, to rural people's lives, their livelihoods, and their cultures. Now, one of the characteristics we see in the mining industry is increasingly its open cast. Open cast in a developed country like Europe is unheard of. You don't do it. It's far too expensive. You cannot take hundreds of hectares of land and convert it into dumps because the land is too valuable. Here, communal agricultural land is valued at its agricultural value. Often it's poor land, it's valued at 1,000, 3,000 rand per hectare. And it's acquired by the mining companies and sold by government and leased by government to mining companies to rip apart at those nominal values. Now there's something wrong with the way that people's land is being valued. That land has got a greater value than agricultural value. It has the value of sustaining people. It is the value of giving jobs to people. It is the value of holding those communities together. It provides a socially cohesive function. It provides, it gives women value who work on that land, and it gives them status and position in their communities. Take away that land at 3,000 rand a hectare, the harm you do is massively greater than the 3,000 rand at which some valuer has valued it. So where are the solutions? Well, the problem is daunting. It's difficult. It's overwhelming, and it's very easy to get depressed. But clearly, the solution lies with civil society. It relies with groups like this, people like you, to stand up, organize, mobilize. Crucially, we have to develop a coherent philosophy of our own. We've got to get concepts like sustainable development. We've got to get that concept through to grassroots. People need to understand it. People need to feel it. People need to understand how development is impacting on their lives. They need to understand that it's not just about jobs and investment. Crucially, we must stop looking to the state for solutions. We must stop contesting for state power. We must engage in these struggles, and we must take on the enemy. We must take on the opposition directly. We are too focused on state power and state decision making. We should put the state aside and focus on where the real problem lies. And a third factor that I'd like to mention, we need to internationalize our struggles. The people in Papua New Guinea, people in mining communities in South America, indigenous Aboriginal people in Australia, indigenous people in Canada and the United States, they are engaged in the same struggles as rural communities are there. There are communities in Tanzania and the DRC around the world who are experiencing exactly what we're experiencing. We need to engage, we need to learn from each other, we need to work together. That will make us stronger and strengthen them too. Change must take place across the world. And I think last and most important, we need to break down the class and race barriers that continue to divide and misdirect our opposition to the current destructive path that's being followed by government and big business. We've got to cross these barriers. We can't have greenies and communities, environmentalists, rich and poor, black and white. Those kinds of cleavages and divisions make us weak. And we have to find a way of overcoming these divisions to unite, to strengthen ourselves, and to tackle the problem. Thank you.